o'clock. We're going to go ahead and get started. Instead of using a microphone, why don't I ask all of you to come a little forward to your chairs? Especially you two ruffians in the background. Well, to get things underway, we are, it's no secret, we're looking at our facilities, how to improve our facilities, do long-range facility plans, and get our facilities, safe, secure, and basically fixed. A couple years ago, we received a grant from OEE where we procured cooperative strategies. They sent a team out on April 2018. They did a 2 or 3 day walk around, looked at every facility in this district, and came back with a very detailed report that they presented to the board a year ago, August. Since then, been working on format to engage the communities, which is what we're doing this evening, and then moving forward with the possible consideration of a bond. So, without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to our two representatives from Cooperative Strategies. I'm pleased to introduce David Sturts. He's out of Ohio. And Ben Clark. Ben's out of San Diego. So, gentlemen, it's your show.
Thank you. Good evening. So I'll do a brief introduction here, and then I think since we're a small enough crowd, maybe we can just do a quick whip around and introduce yourselves. And if you don't want to, you can just pass or nudge the person to your left. Tell your wife to talk for you, whatever you want to do. And then we're going to be right into the presentation. Be about 20 minutes of just the presentation, but feel free to stop, raise your hand, questions. This is a dialogue. After the presentation about what we're doing, what the results are, what's next from this report, we are going to have some small group conversation. And when we're going to look at the summary level of your facility data that we have right now, that looks at size of the buildings, capacity of that building, looking at your capacity in 2 different ways, enrollment, so that's the utilization, how many kids do you have versus how many kids do you have in the building. We'll look at that in 2 different ways and explain that. What's the condition of your building? What's the severity of those needs of condition relative to each other? And then as a group, we're going to work in small groups of 4 to 5 folks in a time and ask yourselves the question, what is this data, what are your reactions to this data? What kind of thing, what is it, what's your first thoughts of what to do with it perhaps? What kind of options do you think you might want to consider given what the data is suggesting? And then, is there any data that you think that might be missing, and I'll explain this all later, any from our assessment or needs to be additionally considered when we develop options? Options will be for a facilities master plan. Where and why should we prioritize major capital investments in your schools? When we talk about major capital investments, sort of the colloquial thing I think of is, if I can go to Home Depot or Lowe's and buy it, it's not in a master plan. That kind of repair, the sink is leaking, I need to fix up a tile. That's not what we're talking. We're talking about we need to replace all the tiles, the roof. Do we have the right buildings that in the right locations for our population, given all that their needs are? That's what a master plan is. It is directing your capital funds for a long-term future, given your financial realities, your enrollment realities, and the condition of your buildings. In your vision, where do you want to go? What's going to be the right set of facilities for the next generation? We want to start tilting the investments in that way because our buildings are 50 plus years old, or 100, and they were built for a population at that time, for needs at that time. And now we're working around it, so now we're trying to shift in master planning, shift towards the future generation. Okay, so that's a little long. My name is David Sturts with Cooperative Strategies. I've been doing this for 8 years with the company, everything from states to large districts or small districts, coast to coast. And this is all we do, is we work with K-12 school districts, and everything on the operational side of the fence that's not teaching, we do it to help schools, just make schools work. That's our thing. Before that, I ran a tutoring company. Before that, I was a teacher. So my life is in education. My wife is a teacher. My mom is a teacher. Everybody gets a family business. I just happen to be on this side of the fence. But that's a little introduction here, and then let Ben introduce himself, and then ask a quick whip around if you could say your name and your role in the school and or community, if you don't mind, and then we'll get started. Ben?
Good evening, I'm Ben. Been working with Cooperative Strategies now for just under a year. However, I came from kind of the project management and construction basis before, so kind of know the ins and outs of facilities, the assessments that we did, and kind of move it through and see what we can do for you.
Susan Warner, elementary principal. And Nelson's business manager.
Lane Stratton, principal, high school, middle school.
Michael Lyon, like County Regular Dales,
Randy Adley, operator, realtor.
Caroline, teacher.
Mike Ramsey, Board Service.
Dominic teacher.
Scott Ryan, County Council.
Lonnie Langham, secretary of the school.
Dustin Stason, school board member.
Amy Bentley, school board.
Ruth Ann Mize, teacher.
Robert Mize, parent.
Yeah, I'm with her. Yeah.
Rosanna Cahill, school counselor.
Sharon Brogan, self-employed, spit a taxpayer.
Vocational superintendent. Kevin Winter, reporter at the Examiner.
What number is it, Johns? I'm John, retired citizen.
Barry Schulberg, school board member.
Okay. Well, thank you all very much. Okay, so facilities master plan. We look 5 to 10 years out. Here's why. In 5 years, you really have the highest statistical reliability for your loan projections based upon how they're done. They look at how many kids are born in your area and then show up in kindergarten 5 years later. We look at that for 10 years in the past. We look at how many kindergartners become first graders become second graders, so on and so forth. That's called a cohort survival methodology. A cohort is a group of kids born at the same time. So we've done that for your school district. And we looked at that 10-year, we've done that 10-year forward projection. But we look at the 5 year as a real planning number. The 10-year, you're starting to hypothesize how many kids are going to be birthed. So it gets born. Let's try that. Born. And so it gets a little squishier, but we like to use that 5-year number as a target. Also, that's a standard amount of time to identify projects, to prioritize projects, to fund and build. And so school districts are usually on a 5 to 10 year, once, when you're looking at doing capital needs like that, it's a 5 to 10 year cycle to take a look at what are my major priorities, what do I need to consider moving forward. And it considers everything. It's not just if it's broke, we need to fix it. That's one element of a master plan, but it's also if it's broke, should we have it? What are we trying to do? What's the goal here? What's the best long-term investment for our community, for our citizens, our taxpayers, our kids? What's the best overall? All things considered, not one thing considered. Okay? So what do? We did condition assessments. We've done a community survey. I'm going to do the results. I'll show the results of that. We had 163 people take the online survey. You're here tonight. You're adding a layer to that community engagement. Tomorrow morning, meeting with district leadership, and we are going to take all the data, and we're going to come up with some ideas. What would be a part of a recommended facilities master plan? We'll draft those, we'll take a step back, and I'll work with the district leadership over the coming weeks to refine it. That will become the basis for your report to ODE on the facilities master plan for a 5 to 10 year look ahead. Okay. So, the survey summary. We had it open from the end of September until just last week. We had 163 community members involved on that. We had support, I'll go over the slide-by-slide details, support for facility repairs and modernized HVAC systems, air handlers, those kinds of things. Improve specialized spaces like science lab, multi-purpose spaces, STEM labs, those kinds of things. STEM, career tech, and computer and technology spaces, when we ask questions about priorities for renovations from an educational standpoint, those rose to the top. And security was a high priority, which, is frankly everywhere. And so we'll go over what the keys there were. Operating locks on all exterior doors, making sure we have good solid locks there, security cameras, and then to a lesser extent, the best security vestibules, which are those secure front entrance concepts, were priority. So let's go through it. And just, well, let me think again. So before we get into the survey here, I apologize. So there's two things that I mentioned we look at. If it's broke, we fix it. That's called a capital improvement plan. We have it, we should fix it up. The other kind is a portfolio, which is should we have it. So we look at portfolio, capital. You have multiple schools on multiple sites that are close together, and they all have needs. So capital questions are, what are the priorities to fix up with what we have? Portfolio questions are, moving forward, should we have all the schools where they are? Should we look at consolidating? Should we look at, what are the options? Should we look at repurposing something? What that's portfolio. Okay. Could be a grade configuration change. Maybe you want to go to a K-8 in a high school. Maybe you want to do a 6-12. Maybe all those different kind of things, that's a portfolio level question. Okay. When we do that, tomorrow morning, we're going to start with where are we going? Where do you want to go? So we'll talk with district leadership and have a brief visioning session on what are your priorities and why are they priorities for your kids in terms of the educational environments that they should have. Because this is a construction and what's broke kind of plan, but it's also what's the best environment for kids? What does that look like? So we ask questions like, what should every elementary student have access to in his or her classroom environment? What should be a standard? We'll go through that. Before that, we get into some visioning questions as to why. The same question for middle school, the same question for high school. Then we can overlay that with what you have on top of your condition assessment to see, okay, so when we're looking to provide the kind of learning spaces that we want, what are our priorities, how do we prioritize dollars, then we can provide some cost estimates for that, then we can see if we can afford it or make it a broader package for everything. So we'll start with that, and then we layer on top of that facility needs. And I'm going to show that we have some areas where we have some overutilization, some schools that have more kids than they have space. But if you did some work to those schools, that wouldn't necessarily be the case. We'll also see places where you have lots of major repair needs in a school, daily, middle school, and then others where it's a little bit more nuanced. Sir?
In this initial assessment of the buildings and facilities, was the KCC Innovation and Learning Center included in this survey? So,
yeah, so we surveyed the whole building, and I know that's taking up, which part of the building is that? That's in the, which one now?
DMS.
The middle school, that's right. So, yeah, so we looked at the whole building, but from a capacity standpoint, we're counting the capacity of what you can actually use.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where you'll see it, it's kind of cuts both ways.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and when we did a condition assessment, I might as well just go there now. So this is how we do a condition assessment for Oregon Department of Education. They do what's called a visual year one assessment, which means we have this rubric, our assessors walk through, and we look at the interior, the exterior, the site, ceiling, roofs, everything, and visual inspection. Hey, is this roof, how's the roof in terms of is it bowing? Are there tiles missing? If so, to what degree? Okay? And we look at those things, and then we note, oh, this is mild bowing, mild tile damage over the square foot of the roof times the cost to fix it equals what you're going to see in the repair value for that roof. And if it's major, then that has a higher replacement value, repair value. Okay? It is an inherently conservative measure because all we're doing is we're looking at what's broke now. We're not looking at, hey, it's a 30-year roof and it's year 29. And we're not projecting, hey, in 1 year it's going to be obsolete. So the way that ODE does it under this grant is to make a conservative estimate. So when you see these deficiencies, it's a pretty conservative number. Know that that's not counting life cycle issues that happen in any building, home, school, or otherwise. Okay. I'm repeating myself because I got out of order, so I've talked about this I'm not gonna bore you. But that's our assessment. We went all over the buildings, and did that visual assessment. Here's the big summary. Now, we're gonna come back to this when we do the small group conversation. So I'm gonna read it out, the major highlights, it's hard to read for you. So at Hayes Fremont, year built 1952, we have about 43,000 square feet. If you were to build a new elementary school, typically today, elementary schools are built about 125 square foot per student. That accounts for classroom sizes, that accounts for administration spaces, that accounts for gymnasiums, that accounts for the basics that go into new construction across the country as a general model. It flexes up and down whether you're in Chicago or Wyoming or here, but that's a planning number that we use. Middle schools are 150 and high schools are 175 square foot per student. So what we do is we looked at, well, if this was built to today's standards, it could hold about 350 kids. Well, it holds about 334, it's pretty close. That's your program capacity, is how many classrooms do you have, how many kids can fit in that classroom. And we factor that down a smidge, so 95% of the full capacity of an elementary school is its program capacity, because it's a little fluff. You're never going to fill every building, every classroom to 100% of its capacity every period for the whole school year. It doesn't work that way. You can be close in elementary school. Okay, so you're 110% utilized based on your enrollment of 368 and your program capacity. So you're pretty full. In my world, in doing this kind of work, you really want to be 90 to 100% of your program capacity. That's comfy full. Once you get north of 100, it gets a little too full. Once you get above 110, starting to get to 120, you're really full. 120 is that marker where, okay, we've got to do something. We've got to relieve this pressure, or we've got to build. And the closer you get to that, the more that pressure becomes. When we look at the replacement value, this is the total square foot times the assessed square foot to build, cost to build a new school. So you get an idea. If we were going to replace this school in its entirety, how much would that cost? Approximately. Well, about $18 million. This is how much found of deficiencies, $3.1 million. That provides you an FCI of 17%. FCI is a facility condition index. That is the cost to repair divided by the cost to replace. Here's the analogy. Everybody remembers their first used car. Mine was a Ford Pro. I love that thing. Hatchback. When the cost to fix the brakes and the calipers exceeded half the value of the car, I reluctantly got a new car. Because it just wasn't worth it. Because I knew at that point, 6 months from then, a year from then, something else was going to go. That's just how it gets when you start to get to a certain age. That's like it is for a building. Okay? The higher the FCI, the more cost to repair that thing versus replace it. Of the repair dollars, $2.5 million was identified by your staff as top priority in terms of what we really need to take care of right now. After they reviewed our assessment, I asked, give me red, yellow, green. What do we need to do right now? What should be done soon, and what can we defer? So this is a secondary pass. It's not just our eyes on it. So about 80% of the repairs were identified as a top priority repair. So let's look at Union. Your Centennial building. If every space was functional, you could fit about 150 kids in there if you could gut the building and redo it. But considering you have 3 operating classrooms, you can't. So your program capacity is more like 84, which is really small. Don't need to tell you that. So you have some extra space because you have 51 kids in it, but that's artificial. Like you can only use those 3 classrooms, so that's driving your capacity. You have about $8 million to replace that building, $2 million in repairs, 26 FCI, that's fairly much higher. You see that's higher than our Fremont. Why? It's really small. The cost to replace that is less. The cost to repair it versus replace it is more. That makes sense? Of those needs, about 67% of the repair needs are identified as top priority. Now, at Daly, based on square foot per student capacity, you could fit about 318 kids in it. Based on how it's currently, the condition of the current building, you can only fit about half that. Less than. 121 kids, you're 81% utilized, 21 million to replace, 7 million to repair. Of that 7 million, it's basically all top priority. Which doesn't surprise me, because every district I work in, from the largest to the smallest, the middle schools are passed over. Because they're crazy kids. No. Because the reason is, I have. The middle school is the thing you look forward to, from the home elementary school that's so cozy that you love, to the high school jersey you want to wear. You're there for the shortest amount of time. It's the pass through. Many middle schools are in hand-me-down high schools over time, and so it's just the way it is. That doesn't surprise me, at least. 19 and Lakeview, 1962. Larger building, based on square feet, could hold 424, has basically one classroom less based on program capacity. Pretty standard. Okay, that makes sense. Enrollment 220, you got some extra room. $35 million replacement, 7 in repairs, 20 FCI, 5.5 of that, of those 7 million are top priority, we're about 76%. All total, you replaced everything under the sun, it'd be 82 million. Square foot per square foot, but you never need to do that. You actually have more square feet than you need. It's just not all functional. Repair costs, if you fixed everything, 19.4 million. If you fix just your top priorities, 16.2. Sir?
The enrollment for Daly Middle School is at 121. Isn't that somewhat misleading in that the middle school kids are actually, and the high school, use Daly Middle School and the high school kind of jointly?
Yeah, so we actually talked about, should we just combine these two? And we're
A lot
going,
of instances where you're actually pushing closer to 300 in the high school,
right,
probably.
right.
Daily basis or class.
Yeah, so perhaps what we want to do, and we can look at this tomorrow, that's a great point. We can, just like we do for 80 Fremont, we look at Daly Lakeview as an aggregate number. What's the total capacity here? What's the total enrollment here? Think of it as a unit. So when you do that, we're looking at, we have a capacity for, 550? And from a program capacity standpoint, Los Alamitos, we have 341 enrolled. So, you have some space, but you don't have it where you need it. And the space needs a lot of work to operate efficiently. And if it was in great condition, you could actually operate much more efficiently. But you got to get it there. So the question is, how do we get it there? Or what does that look like? Okay. One of the things that it's good to keep in mind too is when David was built and Union was built, they were built with 100-year life cycles in mind, generally speaking. They were built for the ages. The buildings built up to the WPA era, right before the crash, the Depression, and right after, actually WPA era was right after the Depression, were built, they were over-engineered behemoths that were stone, brick. They're not going anywhere. Now their guts are going to get tired and need to be replaced. But those facades, generally speaking, were over-engineered and built for the ages. In the 50s, 60s, when most of the schools in the country were built, they were built fast. Why? Trivia question, teachers.
Baby boom generation.
There you go. We had two things. We had the boomers, and we had a financial echo boom from the Depression. We didn't build a whole lot in the 40s. What we did, we over-engineered those WPA buildings. We built them as a government thing. And then when the population started to boom, ooh, we gotta get schools quick. So these schools were built with 50-year life cycles on average. Lots of wood, asbestos, other things that don't last like stone. And we built them as a nation, and then we thought we were done. Then we had some tough economic years and decades, and so to keep the focus on the kids and the teachers, you take that out of the building, you give it to the operations, and those chickens are coming home to roost across the country. Where these buildings with 50-year life cycles are in year 60, 70, they're designed so that you invest about 2% of their value every year over the course of its life to keep it up. So over 50 years, you spend 2% of its value a year. In 50 years, you've replaced the building. Simple math. Nobody's done it. Nobody. Across the country. And so these issues are what we call deferred maintenance. Maintenance that could have been a Home Depot run now becomes a capital need over time. Sir.
So you mentioned the buildings, the WP area meant to last forever.
Right.
50s, 60s, really cheap, really quick, we need schools.
Relatively.
Relatively speaking,
Right.
relatively. Modern schools, let's say you build a brand new elementary school today, the life cycle of that building would be still about 50 years?
No, so we've taken a turn. So up through the 80s, 90s, I'd say yes. We've taken a turn on, and they're having longer life cycles now. Some of the new, and this is not me, this is coming from architect friends that I work with around the country. So, yeah, and also, they're much more efficient. The school district I'm working with has 123 different schools. We're closing up that master plan. Look at their operating expenses. The cost to operate their facilities that were built before 1990 are on average 1.5 times more than the schools built since 1990. That's not personnel, that's heating, cooling, cleaning, all that stuff. They're just more efficient. So there's that ongoing expense, and they're built with that longer lifestyle in mind. There's just more of the hard stuff, less of the flimsy stuff. Why? One of the reasons why, it's one of the mantras of new construction for schools, is you want flexibility. You want to be able to gut and redo the interior so that you can do lots of different things. To do that, you can't have a lot of load-bearing walls. To do that, you have to have really strong structures. So it kind of works its way out from an academic logic to a physical structure. Okay. Right. So, I've gone over this. This is just more for, you can look at in detail later. This is that breakdown of all major repairs and then all moderate. So what's not major is next moderate, or not on there, then it could be deferred. This is for the report, but you've seen the highlights here, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on here. All total, that's how it breaks down major versus moderate needs in terms of what your staff identified from our assessment. Now, Ben, the survey results. The yellow one, okay. That's why I was fishing for that. So let's switch, if you don't mind. And now we'll go to the survey results. And then we'll do large group conversation and small group conversation. Okay, so I've already done this. This is a different way to show you the same thing. So I'm going to breeze through this stuff. These are the potential outcomes. We look at it in a master plan. It's everything under the sun. From new construction to major or modern renovations, to rating configuration changes like I mentioned, to furniture, fixture, and equipment. If you can't fix up a whole school, if that's not working for whatever reason, you replace these things with tables and chairs that move, that actually have wheels, not the tennis balls that we stick on the tops of the 1950 desks that weigh 50 pounds. But if you actually make the stuff in the room much more flexible and dynamic, it makes a big difference. You buy that to scale, it's not cheap. And so that's why one of the things that you can consider, along with things like boundary changes, which really wouldn't make too much sense for you all. But as we kind of look at no stone unturned. I've gone through that, so here's the survey. 163 respondents. I've gone over that. Hey, this is just duplicate, I'm sorry, I'll just go through here. Let's just right to it. So when I asked the question about rate level support for replacing outdated classroom furniture and equipment with modern classroom furniture, such as desks, tables, chairs, teaching tools, that's what I just mentioned. I always aggregate, strongly agree and agree to see who actually really agrees. 73% of 163 voiced support. When we ask the question, which of the following space types do you believe the district should prioritize when renovating current classrooms and other learning environments? Highest priorities, 1, 2, 3, STEM and STEAM rooms, elementary multi-purpose gyms, cafe, space, and career tech spaces. Career tech has had a renaissance in the last 10 years. Why? Because of the recession. We pushed down VOTech. We kind of ignored that collectively as a nation for years until the college graduate with a liberal arts degree, that was me, was working at Tim Hortons when he graduated, while the kid who got out, the plumber, started at 60 And oh, by the way, when we look at districts that are in large urban settings right now, and you may have it here too, there's not enough general contractors, so there's not enough skilled labor to do the construction work. So construction costs are going really high because all the baby boomers are retiring. And they have these jobs. And we didn't fulfill it, we didn't backfill that in with our career tech. And now we're in a oh shoot moment with that. And so it's, hey, this is suddenly cool again. So there's a lot of push for career tech investments. We asked about security, highest priorities, locks, security cameras, security officer following that is best view. Now an officer is not a capital solution. It's not a capital plan. We throw it in there to see just kind of what's people's priorities there. Best field came in fourth in terms of priority. Those are not cheap, by the way. When we ask a question about greater levels of support for investing in technology upgrades, such as high-speed wireless, replacing obsolete devices, same percentage, about 73. Actually, no, I did my math wrong. I did it on the plane. 83. Not 73. I'll fix that. Why? Because my computer's 3-year life cycle is on year 5. Ooh, it's time. I can assure you that thing crashes every other day. So, most respondents from a background 25 to 54 years old. Most were college graduates. 48% of those said they were parents were parents of elementary children. And 58% of respondents have lived in the district for 10 or more years. So, and only 20% were employees. 80% were not. And you can see sort of which school do you affiliate most strongly with. Well, everybody most strongly affiliates with the high school because we're one high school town. That's just the way it is. There you go. Okay, so now with that, what we're going to do is go back. You'll got a bonus because I inadvertently did this presentation too, and this is for the options development tomorrow. So, hey, it's a preview. This is what we're doing tomorrow in the options development. Probably my whole thing. All right, so here we go. 3 questions for you. So, find a group of 4 around you, 4, 5, 6. We're not picky. If you know everybody, find some group that maybe you don't know everybody. You're all like, oh, yeah, it's not going to happen. Try. And when you look at this, the 3 questions, and I'm going to give you some chart paper to write your notes on as a table. Basically, it's a small group. Flip the tables around and volunteer or voluntold a scribe who has better writing than I do to sort of take notes for you, for your group. And the 3 questions, again, are: what is your reaction to this data? What do you think this data suggests in terms of the kinds of options that we should consider in a facilities master plan? And is there any information that you think is relevant to developing those options that you did not see in this presentation that we should discuss? I'm going to give you 20 minutes to start with. We'll see. I'm here all night. We'll do 20, 30 minutes to start with. Check in with you. If you need more time, that's fine. Once everybody's kind of come to a settling point, we're going to report out as a group. Every group's going to report out a little bit, and then that'll be that. We'll wrap up. Okay? Before we do that, is there any sort of macro level questions, comments that you want to either ask or get out in the air before we get into small group conversation?
Can you describe a little bit more about major and moderate repairs?
Sure. So I asked Janet to say, hey, can you talk to your facilities team? And what I'd like you to do is just tell me, look through our condition reports. I don't want to be the only one who look at it. Look through it and say, of these things that we identified as deficiencies, what is a top priority? This must be done in the next 5 years. What do we think must be done in the next 5 years? If you think it might be able to wait beyond that, kick it down a notch. Goes into the moderate or mild. You didn't have anything in the sort of a, yeah, we can defer for 10 years. But you have to get this done right now. In this cycle, we could possibly wait. That's the difference between major and moderate. And that is a qualitative assessment from your facilities team, looking at the condition assessment that we did. So just a second option. It's a good, I like to do that because I don't want to just come in as the alien, check some things and say, here's your need, don't question it. I want to kind of get the folks on the ground to look at it and tell me their thoughts.
Where's your projection of growth? You're coming to these figures, and whichever one is most cost effective. Where's the growth factor in the projection?
Good question. So, tell you what, I will actually pull up, I have that on my desktop, so I'll pull that up here while we're starting this small group conversation. I'll show you. What we did is we did a district-wide projection for you. So we look at the entire K-12 population by grade for 10 years, then we project that out for 10 years, so I'll bring that up here, I'll show you.
There's been projections in housing needs that were just done.
Oh, I see.
And so forth. Also.
Yeah, and if not, the growth is not huge,
Right.
right? But you can see the housing start to take a real dip, which you would know. But let me pull that report up, and then after we start this small group conversation, I'll take a few minutes and kind of talk through those talking points. But I want to have those slides up. Good, great question.
I think there was a question on the.
What was STEMs? I don't know what STEMs was on your.
STEM?
Yeah.
STEM, I'm sorry, jargon, education jargon. STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math.
Okay.
Or
Okay.
STEAM, which is basically ag art.
Okay, so in that survey, I didn't see anything about the buildings too much.
Right.
That wasn't people's concern, is that what? you
So,
saw in the survey?
that's, okay, good observation. The survey was really about sort of the qualitative aspects of the facility. We did a quantitative assessment on the condition work, and we have the capacity, so that's sort of the number crunching. What we want to get in the survey is for things that aren't behind the walls or on the roof, what matters to you?
Oh.
Right, so that's the sort of how the building works. Like what do I want above and beyond? So because we have the quantitative stuff, we want now what makes the house a home, if you will, kind of analogy.
Okay, and so did you tell us what the questions are then that you want us to?
Yes. So the three questions. One is first of all just general reactions to the data, surprises. That's an open question. Reaction to the data at large. Two, what kind of options do you think this data suggests for major capital investments? New construction, renovations, consolidations, configuration changes, blah, 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 blah. And then lastly, is there any other data that we need to consider in developing those options other than what we have up here? Here's what I mean. Every town's got a history. Every building has a history that we can't see from walking it once, right? What else is there that's pertinent? Some of it's ephemeral and that doesn't really affect us planning. Some of it actually matters. We want to, sir.
I have a couple of things. One of them, I'm going to ask you about now. One thing that concerns me is the historical value of the Union School and then the Daily School.
Right.
You know, if you looked at that, And hey, what can we do to preserve those? We may not use them as a school, but, or we're just saying, hey, we don't care.
Yeah.
All we want to do is do modernize.
Yeah.
The other question I had was, in regards to your survey, did you folks, as a part of the contract, for you folks to consider or put out some ideas on what other uses for the structures, let's say if you moved out? Like in some
Yeah.
communities, what they've done with a high school that was no longer functioning, they built a new high school, but they still had that building.
Right.
And what they did was the city had real small buildings like we have here. Our city hall is real small.
Right.
And what this did, I don't know how they worked the deal, but they worked out a deal and the city took over the buildings. They
Yep.
said, hey, you know, it's better
Yep.
for us to move into the Fremont School than for us to build a new facility. The other thing is, jail facilities.
Yep.
Those type of facilities.
Yep.
And because instead of saying, hey, well, we're just gonna, as soon as you say we can build another one, we have the cats out back that are just gonna level right.
Oh yeah, sure. So yes, use for cats is not a good option. So like, what a real so first of all, to answer your first question, absolutely, I love those old buildings personally, and bring my own bias. I really appreciate that old, solid, built for the ages architecture. It doesn't always mean it's a great school, right? And so when we do look at tomorrow morning, when we sit down for options development, that is in our contract to say, okay, if we look at it something different, what would we do with the existing building? Sometimes the answer is apparent and right in the room, and people have some strong ideas and some valid concepts for what that could be. Sometimes it's more of, I know who we should talk to about that. Let's pursue that more. But that is part of our contract, is to come up with the options, because simply just vacating it and ignoring it is not an option. It's using it for some value. Yeah, absolutely.
So you mentioned newer schools are built for flexibility of the interior,
Right.
for changes. Based on the answers in the survey that people emphasize, like STEM or STEAM,
Right.
multi-purpose places and CTE spaces, how does that would fit in a flexible space saying, let's say these change in 5 to 10 years, these priorities change
Right.
in 5 to 10 years to a more liberal arts direction?
Yeah. So that's a fantastic question, and if I may, a question behind that question is, when we look at what's popular now, is it just a fad that's going to pass in time? And if that's so, what if what does that leave us if we make this big investment? So one of the beauties about modern school design, again, caveat, comma, when done right, is that when you're flexible, you can teach your regular English arts. You can line up desks in a row, you can lecture for 50 minutes. You can also spin that stuff around, lecture for 8 minutes, and do work. Do projects. The flexible space gives you the flexibility to adapt over time. The rigidity in which we inherited these buildings that are built on a factory line model with an industrial mindset in an industrial era for an industrial economy prohibits a lot of that flexibility. Mm-hmm. Right? And so that's really why I have a lot of confidence. The one place we got this wrong as a nation was in the 70s, which, in addition to fashion, we got school construction wrong. And that's kind of thing to mention. So the idea there was, in the 70s, we were going to have these open pods. We weren't going to have walls, and it was going to be freeform. Well, what happened? My mother taught in one of those schools, and almost didn't have kids because of it, because they're so loud, you can't concentrate, it's not organized. There's no separation of space. So we went from every space is separated to no separation of space. The answer for modern school design is a diverse array of spaces, small, big, individual, small group, tied together in an ecosystem of space where I have access to that space, that space, that space, and that space around me. So it's flexible. I can do my traditional, I can do my one-on-one, I have my counselor, and it's available to me. When you do that right, you can adapt over time. Okay. All right, let's do this.
One thing historically there's a point you're talking about. The fellow who designed those, what you would call open space,
Right.
what people call open space, I heard him on the television once, and he said, hey, they took my idea and messed it up.
Yes, they did.
And he said, I never recommended cubicles. I recommended rooms, and I recommended one room that was there where people could get together and talk about ideas and
Right.
stuff. And then go back to their rooms. But instead, people said, oh, we got these little cubicles, and then when we want to talk, we take the walls down. No.
Yeah.
And I don't think it doesn't work for adults, and it doesn't work for kids.
It doesn't. And that's where modern school design has improved upon that. And what you have in a lot of modern school design is what used to be a boring hallway that all you did is walk through with lockers that kids don't use as much anymore. It actually has desks against the wall. Like you can plug in your computer and work. It's activating dead space. That is a commons area that we can spill out into, talk, work asynchronously, and then go back to our classrooms. Called an extended learning area is my nomenclature for it, but there's different words for it, right? But that's the idea of how it should be done right. Yeah. Okay, so let's do this. Find some friends, spin your tables around. I'm going to get you some poster board, 3 questions, reactions. What are the options that you consider based upon this data discussion? Is there anything else that we need to consider from a data perspective? We'll reconvene. I'll check back in with you at quarter after. Okay? So let's find some friends and get these poster board. Let's start over here and work our way around the room. So if you don't mind, somebody I'll be your Vanna, and I'll hold this up here.
It's him. I wrote it down.
Lane has left the building. All right. So what do we got here?
Yes.
Yeah, somebody.
So the reaction, no, need to do something, and how did you come up with the dollar figure for the repair estimates?
Okay.
Not so much
Great
the
question.
for the repair estimates.
So the repair, it's a ODE standard. I believe the exact number, well, I think it's like $443 a square foot or $433 a square foot for all-in costs. That includes construction, soft costs, everything that involves construction, times the gross square feet. So if you want that number exactly, you take the replacement value, divide it by GSF, and you get gross square feet, you get what ODE's plug number is for looking at school replacement.
And then where did you get the money for the estimated repair costs?
The repair costs, that is using ODE's condition assessment, which we have the full details on, where that's our team coming out, looking at something and saying, this tile, based upon the description of what condition it should be in, mild, good condition, mild deficiency, moderate deficiency, severe deficiency, needs to be replaced based on those descriptions. We're going to call this one mild, based upon what we're seeing relative to the description there, based on how big that is. There's a cost model built into that assessment tool that tells you if mild and this component of this floor at this size, then here's the repair value.
Was our location at all used in part of figuring the cost to repair? Because
Yes.
the cost to have a crew come here to do those repairs is going to be more than Bedford, Bend.
Sure. So there is a location-specific cost model factor that's behind the scenes that we plug in when we're doing the cost estimates. We have to plug in the gross square feet of the building. We have to plug in its county, its location, and then those things intersect with the background to pull the different cost values.
Number 2, the data suggests that we got to do something, probably repair rather than replace due to costs. And then what wasn't in the data? Not enough class space at the 7-8 high school. Talking about the square footage, the high school shows it has a lot of square footage. And I assume that is also because it includes the gym, the wrestling room, the CTE buildings, the band and choir, working with EMS.
Yep.
And so even though it shows that we got a lot of unused square footage, or a lot of square footage compared to the students, we really don't have that much space.
In terms of the classroom learning environment that's there, that's different, right?
Okay. And then what's not in the data is a lot of like the high school right now is not ADA compliant, so we're talking about.
Right.
You know, if I were to have a wheelchair-bound student who would be, that's not a special needs student, that was in a general population, we would need some of that stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. This group?
Okay, so, I don't know if we quite got question 3, right? We also said that the cost was high. Wondered if you compared the numbers to, what's the wording? Other builders?
Yeah.
Different buildings, yeah.
Different builders, you know. Is this just your guys' estimate, or is this, I mean, can somebody come in and say, hey, we can do it for a little bit less?
Yeah, and so I'll stop at that point because this number is a budgeting number, so it is a model number. So it's the square feet, the component type, how big is that component, what degree of deficiency does that component have based on where are we. Okay, so those are big factors that are all impact to give you a model cost. Then the purpose of this is to give you a budget. Once you have decided, okay, we know that the budget cost is more or less the macro level cost is on target, but it's a gross order of magnitude, right? So it can flex depending on the particulars of what you actually do for a project within that budget number. So then what you would do is you say, okay, we have a budget of $2 million for this repair to do these different deficiencies. We're going to get bids for that using a $2 million. Maybe you come in at 1.8, maybe you come in at 2.1. You know, we're the actuals there, but your budget number provides you something to work with, and then you go to bid on specific projects.
So, Barry, could I add something to that? So, do you guys deal with specific builders in the United States that build just these kind of buildings? Are these costs that you're coming up with, like Morton Buildings, they build huge buildings. Are some of these prices coming from a particular builder that actually? Okay.
No, it's not vendor specific.
Okay.
What it is, it's the Oregon Department of Education looking at, all right, average cost by county for type of school construction. They're fixing those different factors in there across developers, not developer specific.
Okay, and then our second one, looking at the numbers up there for Daily Middle School, DMS is doing us no good. You know, it's lived its life. We all know there's no third floor anymore. The basement is a wreck, and so we're only using the main floor on the main building. And KCC's in there, and so we're using the south wing, and the gym over there basically is tiny and built in the 1930s, according to what Will thinks it was. And it is not safe to play sports in that gym anymore. And so that was just a comment that not doing us any good.
Yeah.
Number 2, you know, kind of looking at some of the options, one of the things we were trying to do is prioritize. We want to prioritize roofs, windows, paint, and security. Those were 4 that came out. You know, these are really some things that we need to focus on.
Yeah.
And then the bottom one here, even though DMS isn't doing us any good and Union's 100 years old, we probably still need to keep those buildings. Nostalgia or sentiment, you know, things like that. So there's a way we can incorporate them and fix them up and make them usable. It's still probably a priority.
Another thing we can look at from a budgeting number. So when you look at the replacement value for a school, if you say, you know what, we really want to keep this shell, we want to keep this structure, but we need to redo everything under the sun. You're looking at 2/3 to 3/4 the cost to replace that building would be a full renovation. Typically a 2/3 renovation is I'm going to redo all of the components, HVAC, roof, interiors, walls, stairs, all that stuff. That's a components level replacement, 2/3 replacement. 3/4 gives a little bit more of a room there, but maybe you have some structural needs too. Maybe you're working on, you know, some of the other kind of repairs. But it gives you, so you can think of, well, daily has about 1/3 FCI. That's current year zero deficiencies relative to replacement, right? Well, if I go, say, maybe 2/3, so if I put in 14 million, I could gut that whole thing and redo all the components in that building. So that's just sort of like one of the things we'll talk about tomorrow is what kind of options make sense.
The sad part about DMS is it's been gutted for seismic. You know, a bunch of money's been put in for seismic.
So that's one of the things I didn't know.
And we got nothing. You know, we got no third floor. You know, we got.
The predecessor got $1 million grant to retrofit that building. So basically, well, that wound up, I believe the engineer said the top floor was top heavy. It had too much material on it, so they had to eliminate a lot of it. Then we had to discover another problem, asbestos. And I believe asbestos cost at least $500,000. So basically, by the time they got through paying for the asbestos, eliminating the weight on the top of the building and everything else, it went at least $500,000 over the 1 million.
Yep.
So then we got the building.
And you are describing the challenge of repairs on these old buildings. Because when you start to scratch the surface, oh crud, there's asbestos. Oh crud, there's mold. Oh, that's the rabbit hole of these old buildings, which, in some cases, frankly, it's cheaper in the long run to go hard, to do a big thing, because if you don't, you're just going to be kicking cans and spending more. Not in all cases, but in some. Yeah. Okay, thank you. All right, and lastly here.
Okay, reactions, I think everybody has this, how will it be paid for? Pretty standard reaction. You know, it's surprised at utilization of space for DMS and LHS, but I think Lane touched on it with just the type of classrooms that are there.
You have large volume spaces, right? Yeah.
Stuff. We touched on the union keeping it open, you know, even if it isn't utilized as a school. I think our deferred maintenance up there. Considerations, you know, what type of bond would we even look for? Offset for operating costs of new buildings versus old buildings, replacement versus repair. And touch on this, logistics of the elementary. Just even if we went in and totally repaired Fremont and A, the logistics here is tough with a road going right through the middle of it, and all the access points and the layout of it.
Right.
Doesn't necessarily work. Safety and security, we just had some conversations about the vegetables, and they say that it almost sounds like vegetables.
Close. Close.
And versus an officer and the different aspects of security. So missed info, not able to access grants because of space capacity. An example is a free reduced lunch grant for school-wide, free lunches for all the students just because our facility and our kitchens aren't set up to be able to serve that many people.
Yeah.
So we're missing opportunities there. After school program grants, we're missing those because of our space limitations.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
Missing data, facility use after employees leave. So our facilities are used by a lot of community.
Yeah.
Our athletics, you know, it's not just the 8 to 2 or 8 to 3 time period. There's a great portion of the entire day is utilized.
Sure.
What does that look like? And, you know, taking its time, waste, heat, what kind of cost is the school incurring because of that?
Yeah.
And then this last one I'll elaborate on, budget, all on our own. So right, it's easy to say, you know, we can do this with more money, but what we maybe need to look at is, okay, here's the money we have. What if we budgeted to make these repairs on our own without seeking a bond? You know, our classrooms are already operating at the minimal levels as far as supplies and layout and everything else. What kind of detriment would that have to our programs in general? Would we be cutting, you know, 50% of our staff? Or what would be
Oh, I see what you're saying.
sacrifice in order to
I see.
to actually address some of our building issues?
Oh, that's a great question. So if I may, like reversing the logic that we did for decades, which is we have our schools, we're going to leave them alone and put all that money into the programs and people. But if we're going to do this without a bond, what would the opportunity cost for that be on our programs and our people? Yeah, that's a fantastic question. Yeah. So, comfort is you're not alone. This is part of the reason I have a job. Is a lot of folks are in this kind of planning. Yeah.
I heard a lot of comments in the 10 years that I served on the town council here in Lakeview. I heard comments of the school and the government entities at the top of which they all serve, working together on such things as sports complexes. Is there an avenue for those entities, the county, the town, and other entities perhaps to join in on the endeavor if there is a need for, say, a sports complex or serve the entire community in that regard?
So one of the things that we are required to do under our contract with ODE is after we develop options tomorrow morning is to send a letter to the local jurisdiction, the county, city jurisdiction, say, hey, this is what the district's thinking, positing out there. Do you have any plans that might overlap, or what can we talk?
Well, I bring it up because having served there and advocating for certain revenues that are generating, and I don't mean to spend the present council's money by any means. But the fact of the matter is the county and the town, with what is being built south of town, will experience monies that will be available for a 15-year period. And my hopes, if I had continued anything in that regard in service to the community, would have been to have worked together with the entities and to have brought that about.
Yeah.
And so I just wonder if when those funds become available, they won't be available until the plan is constructed. And community service fees come in, but I do know that those, when I left, those funds were not extended and they can't be until you have them. So
Sure.
That's something that perhaps could be worked out with all the entities in town.
Yeah. Great point. Thank you. Because one of the things we'll look at is, okay, so what's phase one investment? And then what about, could it be a phase two? If we get some resources that we'd really like to do some things, but we can't afford it for whatever reason, maybe on our own. But the question is, does this have to be all on our own? You know, yeah, we'll look at that.
I think like, when you come to a dollar figure, whatever it may be, whatever path you're going down.
Right.
And looking at, the sources of revenue,
Right.
to take care of that, bond, what Mike was talking about, money budgeted, are there grants, are there any other funding avenues that, the discussion we had, a little bit of it was passing bond natures in Lake County. It's an uphill project.
It is.
Anywhere, any rural community.
Yep.
We can't be any different than wherever else.
Green Rivers, Klamath City, we're there too. Yeah.
So,
Yep.
the part of that is when comes to that point, looking at, do you eventually try to reduce the figure coming from the bond from other sources of revenue. To make it smaller.
Sure.
Easier sellable.
Right.
It's all gonna float right on property taxes.
Sure, absolutely.
That's right where it's gonna come from.
Absolutely.
And State of Oregon is, that's how we fund everything.
Yep.
So, sales tax and other revenues there. So, that's the challenge that we were talking about here.
It absolutely is, and you're spot on. There's all available revenue, but what might be out there, in addition to bond revenue that could subsidize that. Okay, so yes, we want to bring it down. I'll tell you another major thing in this, in doing this work, is that how and what you communicate to your community about these needs matters as much as the dollar figure. Sometimes more. There's a threshold, right, where a dollar amount, regardless of how good it is to the community, you're not going to pass $100 million bond. Not going to happen. You're not going to replace everything. Not going to happen. You can do a lot when the community sees what you see, believes in where you're going. So, best practices. Let's use some toys maybe. Let's get some pictures out there. Let's have people come by. Let's look at the options. Let's do some visioning about whatever options we come up with and say other recommendations coming out of this process for the master plan. Have some community meetings about that, focused on what could this look like for you, for this community. What are the benefits of this? What are the challenges of this? And then how do we overcome the challenges and make this benefit? But until people really gut feel the need and see that the answer of it was good enough for me when I was a kid, therefore it's good enough for them, when people can actually say that they don't believe that anymore, that's a huge step. If people think that, it's really hard to overcome. And the way you overcome it is you have people see it for themselves.
Yes.
Not see it in their mind's eye from how it was like 30 years ago, but see it now. And then see the alternative path. And then see, here's the final other thing, is that we're approaching a point of inevitability. Not just with Daly, not just with Union, but across the country, a lot of these things. How long can we keep not doing big things? How long can we keep not doing these big investments in these schools? My bet is 20 years. That if that, in the next 20 years, some of these schools, it's not going to be good. We don't keep up. Like bad stuff will happen. So we've got to make it. At some point, we have to make a decision to do something major, because otherwise the decision will be for us and it won't be pretty.
I had no idea. It's been 45, 50 years since I walked the halls of law. Damn, so. Born and raised here. Went through the whole school system. Well, they do.
Yep.
And you don't know. Okay. You're clueless.
Did you know, Randy, it'll look like this? Did you know that it'll look like this, the school?
I have no idea.
I didn't either.
Okay, yeah, I'm sure I went to school there.
No, I didn't, but I was shocked when I came in here 2 years ago and saw what it looked like.
My number one rule in this business is number one. Everybody must have a shared set of facts. Period. You have to start with a shared set of facts. People have different understanding of what is, you're not going anywhere. The second thing is they have to have shared, at least appreciation for your vision. In my simple anecdote, that creates your sandbox to play in. Data, vision. If everybody sees and understands the same facts on the enrollment, on the condition, and where it's going, and then gets the vision, at least to a degree, that gives you area to create options. That's your samples. You can do something in there, but you have to have those two things. Start with the facts. Do your tours, take your pictures, bring people in. After you have an idea where you want to go, make a case. Yeah, you do. And you can. When you have a reasonable plan, based on solid data, you can do it. But you got to do it. You got to do it 100%.
Well, none of us will let our roofs leak
No.
or our windows leak. I mean, that's just,
Nope.
there's nobody that does that here.
No.
But most people don't know that that's what's going on either.
Right.
The window, you know, the wood's rotting around the windows and because they haven't been painted and we just don't take care of things like that.
And that's the step one. Step two is when it's the roof and the windows and the floors and the kitchen and the plumbing and the HVAC.
And electrical.
You don't go around and duct tape bit and duct tape bit and duct tape bit. Because then you get into what your superintendent was sharing. We scratched the surface to do one project and ended up spending over budget and didn't get anything done that really wanted because there's so much.
And we live in a remote area, so anybody involved in building knows that you're gonna, even if it says it's gonna be this amount of money, you better add 10 to 15% more, because that's more reality. It's gonna cost more,
It costs a lot.
so.
And so, in all of that, what are a shared set of facts? What's the vision? What's the cost of doing nothing? To your point. If we don't do anything,
We're not gonna have a school.
something will happen to us and we will have to react. What then?
Yeah.
Doing nothing is not an option.
Sure.
We'll start there.
Is there any solutions that you have worked with, and then not been able to pass on? Have you seen these schools like that? At different times?
Oh, sure. I've seen some schools who do. Yeah.
And how does the community react then?
How did you let this happen? Wouldn't make one. You know, it's not Disney World. We act like it's not magic. It's money.
We just don't have a place to send them. You know, we're in an urban area, you can.
Correct.
And that's one of our biggest fears as an administration team is that we just physically don't have any other facilities that would adequately take any one of these buildings being condemned, any one of these buildings having something catastrophic happen. We don't have any place to put them. We don't even have a church facility big enough to house them temporarily while you need repairs. We're really in a pretty dire situation that way.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're a good company in this state. And others. Really belong to a state that really did this well, it's Wyoming. Now, they have money coming out of the ground in black spurts. Yeah, looked across the state and said, we're going to dedicate our excise taxes, a good chunk of it, to fixing up our schools. Everybody's going to do a plan, and we're going to plink it off. In over 20 years, they overall reduced their debt capacity in the other state while doing more than the other state in terms of spending. Because they put the money where the mouth is, and it worked. But that's the kind of no hard go home moment I think we're in. Cultural? Put it in the plan, cultural. Anyway. We're almost on time. We're close. I appreciate the opportunity to work. I believe in this work actually can make a difference. This is important stuff, and you can do it, you know, without sounding cheesy. You can actually pass something that will make a difference. It's a big lift. It is an all-in effort. When this succeeds, it is 100% committed, major push. When it fails, it's a plan that considers there's a plan B. So it's not pushed as hard. So, like, there's no plan B. If I feasible. So, anyway, I'll give the floor to you to close this, and off we go.
I want to thank you for your detailed research and everything else, your presentation, and look forward to discussions tomorrow morning.
Yeah, tomorrow morning. It'll be good.
Thank you very much.
Appreciate it.